All right, everyone. Today is extra, extra special. Listeners of our podcast will know this to be true, but we have had some incredible guests on this show. Too many to count, and I am so grateful for all of them. This might be the most excited I've ever been to talk to somebody. And so let's get into it. Everyone, please welcome Christophe Beck to Friends from Work. Let's go, Christophe.
Thank you,
Christophe.
Kyle. I'm very flattered by that introduction. Thank you. It's great to be here.
We are so glad to have you. You've had a crazy year, Christophe. You've had Hawkeye currently. You had Free Guy, which was fantastic, your work there. And then, of course, WandaVision, which was a masterpiece. So you have not, I don't think you've probably had a ton of free time, it sounds like.
It's actually been a little bit less crazy than it would seem because Free Guy, despite the fact that it came out this year, was completed over a year ago. And then the release was delayed by the pandemic. So actually, I was all set to have a pretty busy year. And then a couple of movies that were scheduled to be in post-production this year ended up getting delayed for one reason or another, mostly pandemic related. Okay. So it's been actually a pretty sane year as far as my schedule.
Oh, good.
Welcomingly so.
Good. Well, we've got a lot to talk about, sort of across the spectrum, and particularly with Hawkeye coming out now. But like we said, we're a huge fan of all of your work across the MCU. So we just wanted to take a second and kind of go all the way back to you coming on board with AntMan and hear from you what that process was like to kind of get started in the MCU and to sort of, in some ways, build a character from the ground up musically.
Thanks. I was brought onto AntMan by the director Peyton Reed, who I had worked with many years before, I think 15, 16 years prior to AntMan, on a movie called Bring It On. So we knew each other well from that experience, and he knew that I had experience on that film and many films since then with comedies. And AntMan was from the beginning meant to incorporate comedic elements into the MCU. I also know that Dave Jordan, who is the head of music at Marvel, was a big proponent of mine as well. So it was really an amazing opportunity for me. At the time, Marvel had already established itself as a force to be reckoned with, creatively and commercially, and obviously as a composer. Superhero films, broadly speaking, offer a pretty incredible palette to work with. And the MCU has so many great characters. I never grew up reading Ant-Man comics. So at first I was like, oh, Ant-Man, okay, let's check this out, see what it's all about. Diving into that experience, both Peyton and I were excited to do something maybe a little bit against the mold. We went down, as often happens in filmmaking, you go down one path only to find out later, or at some point that it's maybe not the right one. And I love telling this story. Peyton and I thought that it would be cool to score Ant-Man with a kind of real high concept, glitchy electronic vibe. There is something about the way we think about insects that's skittery, and how that could be expressed with electronic music and interesting and weird synth sounds. And then we played some of that music that we came up with initially to Kevin Feige, who's a bit more of a traditionalist. And he said, wow, this sounds amazing, but it makes me think like my speakers are broken. And you think my speakers are broken. So he nudged us to go toward a more traditional approach. And we realized we had maybe gotten a little bit caught up in our excitement and our shared love of this kind of music, took a step back and realized we were making a heist movie. And there's a long tradition of heist scores that date back to the 60s and 70s, particularly Lalo Schifrin and many others. and that was such a rich tradition of music to explore, and was new to the MCU at least. So it gave Peyton and I the feeling that we were exploring new territory, which is really what attracted us to this sort of weird high concept electronic direction in the first place. So I love what we ended up with. And, you know, those early electronic experiments are still sitting in my back pocket,
just in case,
waiting for the right moment and the right film to be, to rehome. But in the meantime, I'm incredibly proud of the work we did on the AntMan score and its sequel as well. And really looking forward to the third one. Yeah.
I was listening to the Ant-Man and the Wasp score. You see the vinyl back behind me.
I do.
Today. That's one of my favorite scores in the entire, just in general. Yeah, it's fantastic. I love the Ant-Man score, but what you incorporated with the Wasp, I mean, just that opening track you have is, it expands it all in a way that I wouldn't have ever foreseen listening to that Ant-Man score. But it makes it feel massive and emotional, but still kind of has that heist element. It's incredible.
That leads me perfectly into my next two things. One, I just want to say, you're kind of becoming the king of the heist sneaking around sound.
Yeah.
Because of not only Ant-Man the Wasp, but you get that in WandaVision some bongos. Yep. And I love that. So just compliment heist king right here. Secondly,
and of course your Hawkeye has a big
sneaking around
sort of comedic sneaky music as well. Mm-hmm. And I also should mention Tower Heist, which is a movie starring Eddie Murphy and Ben Stiller from, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, which was my introduction to that genre. And a score that I'm incredibly proud of to this day.
That's so perfect. Second thing was, this is super deep cut and half our audience won't understand this, but you brought up the synths originally for Ant-Man. In Ant-Man and the Wasp, there's a track called Arthropody, which we never understand the title of. However,
it's an arthropod. So
okay, good. So we don't know how to say it.
And it's a play on a famous piece by a composer named Eric Satie called Gymnopédie. So anyway, another from a perspective of humor, another deep cut. But anyway, continue.
What are you using for your synth bass there? The synth bass that slowly filters in. What is that, please?
Yeah. I can't remember. I know this is a very unsatisfying answer to you. My guess is that it's a very, I know the piece well. I don't remember what I used for the synth, but I know one of my go-tos for just a big synth sound is also one of the go-tos for many of my colleagues. And I wouldn't surprise me to hear one of yours as well. A virtual instrument called Omnisphere, which is a classic, cool for modern composers. And it just has very beautiful low end already in it. You don't have to do very much to it to get a nice beefy bass out of it. And
then that top end grit.
Yeah, that would be exactly, as you pointed out, the filter opening up gradually to let some of those high frequencies in. And I, if I'm not mistaken, and this is, again, we're going to lose maybe more than half your audience here, but like I believe that a sawtooth, just a pure analog sawtooth wave sample out of Omnisphere. That is one of my favorite sounds to use as a foundation for a bass sound, because you can open up the filter all the way and get all that buzz out of it. But if you close up the filter, it becomes very round and warm and can really support what's going on in terms of low end in a piece. I'm really glad you noticed that. I'm going to go looking at it.
Transitioning into WandaVision here, and I have to give you a tiny bit of background. You won't find larger WandaVision fans than the two people you're talking to right now.
Okay.
So this is where I want to live. This was a masterpiece by you. When you got this project, obviously this is as unique as it comes, right? Like, was there a larger size or scope project you've ever gotten a call for? And let me just say this for example, without even getting into the sitcom stuff, right? So just put that aside for a second. You already have to do like the suspense / horror moments with Beekeeper, Who Are You, tracks like that. Then you had to work in the love, like gentle moments with the Wanda and Vision theme. You also had the action moments, like the typical like Marvel action stuff with the players, sword, etc. And then you still have like the really sad reflective moments with What Is Grief, etc. All of which are so good. It's not like you half did any of it. It's all so good. And that's not even getting into the sitcom stuff. So was this a unique project to you in size and scope?
Oh, for sure. From the moment Marvel called me in to have a meeting about it and tell me about it, the details of the project were under wraps until I sat in that room with Matt Shackman, who directed all the episodes. I realized it was bonkers and incredibly ambitious. And you know, it's interesting. I think one of the reasons, and the answer is no, I've never quite had a project as wide-ranging and as big as ambitious as this one. One of the reasons is that it is a miniseries and not a feature film. There's only 2 hours, maybe a little bit more, of real estate in a feature film. And as a result, there's only so much you could be expected to do as a composer. But when you're talking about 6 hours, it's a whole different story. I would say the closest thing in my career that comes to the scope and ambition of WandaVision is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I scored 60 episodes of or so.
I did not realize that.
What's that?
I didn't realize that.
Yes, and wow. That, similar to WandaVision, there were horror elements, there were apocalyptic elements, there were romantic elements, doomed romance. There were more optimistic and beautiful moments as well. But the difference between WandaVision and Buffy is, I think, in the thematic approach. One of the things I loved about working on WandaVision is they had the 9 episodes written before they were shot. And so I had an idea of what was coming, and I was able to really plan out in a macro way what the important themes would be. And so there was a feeling when I was working on Buffy, because that's an ongoing series. They're cranking out an episode a week. They're doing 22 episodes per season. They're spending a week shooting each episode. It all moves so fast that there's barely time to take a breath. And there certainly isn't the opportunity to get a sense of how the season's going to play out and what themes are going to be there. So as a result, I believe WandaVision, as a result of both the incredibly epic runtime of the series taken as a whole and the opportunity to know ahead of time how it was all going to play out, it's the most strongly thematic score of any kind to date. And so I feel like, similar to the way the show is incredibly ambitious and felt epic and covers so much ground, I feel the same way about my score, to a degree that I can't think of another project that comes quite close to that.
Well, now let's get to the sitcom stuff, Rob.
Well, yeah. It's funny because we have this playlist that's called Journey Through the MCU, and it's just we try to pull a couple of tracks from each score, and that we think are kind of representative of the score.
Yeah, good luck.
Right. So that was all well and good until we get to WandaVision, and you just blew up everything. And so people joke now, you get through the Infinity Saga fairly quickly on that playlist, and then you get to WandaVision, and it's just insane because as I was going through that, I'm like, well, if I'm going to try to represent everything he's doing here, I mean, even like, for instance, in the Halloween episode, like you've got the Chili Con Carne little song, even if they're really short, you've got the moment whenever it does the flashback to Sokovia and the witch with the fish. And it's like, there's so much breadth there. And one is just so impressive, but it made me wonder how many hours of old sitcoms did you watch in preparation for this project?
That's basically the question. How did you pull this off? Because it sounds like so authentic to every decade. And I feel like it would have been an easy project to only do 80% of, and like, kind of like, hey, it's a good knockoff. But this is like, I mean, unbelievable. We get to the 60s and 70s stuff with the bass that's picked and like, are you kidding me? Let's go.
Well, first of all, thank you guys a lot for the kudos. It means a lot. Marvel's commitment to authenticity in this show was really present and evident from the beginning. In fact, I didn't find this out until after we had finished the show, but they tried to hire the actual like composers of those shows from the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Wow.
They went out to see if they could, like, for the sitcom stuff, get the actual guys who did it. Wow. It turned out to be difficult, especially for those early eras. Many of them have passed on. Certainly the ones that haven't are retired and maybe not up for jumping into a modern Hollywood post-production situation, especially Marvel's, which tend to be chaotic. So ultimately, and I'm obviously grateful for the opportunity, they decided to come to me, knowing my background in comedy, knowing my reputation as a very versatile composer, and trusted me to apply that same commitment to authenticity that was demonstrated by them actually going to these original composers. For me, I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, so and to a lesser extent the 70s. So, and I grew up watching those shows, so it was not a question of having to do research in terms of the later decades, but certainly for the earlier decades, there was, I checked out an old episode of Dick Van Dyke Show, I Love Lucy, Bewitched, and immediately got the sense that it was a very jazzy feel. Everything was very live, right? There was obviously no way to record, to have music in a TV show except to record live musicians. There was a small ensemble feel to it. And frankly, the feeling that I needed help. So I brought on a composer named Alex Kovacs, who spent a lot of time in his career working with what you might call a golden age veteran composers, and really understands that musical vernacular, understands all the jazz harmonies that go into it and the orchestrations. And, I brought him on especially to work on the early decades, and he ended up staying on and helping out all the way through, especially with all the sitcom stuff. So I didn't do it all by myself, and it wasn't the result of a ton of research, more the result of lived experience of my own, which covers certain decades as we move through the decades, as we get through the series, and bringing on someone who also has a ton of experience working in those older styles of music from the early decades.
The cheesy 80s piano.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me, Christophe?
Yeah.
It's so good.
So what was the collaboration like between you and the folks that were writing the themes for each episode? Because obviously those blend really well together, and you get shout outs within your score to certain themes. So were y'all working hand in hand there?
More or less, more like hand then hand, as opposed to hand in hand, because Bobby and Kristen Lopez, who are the songwriters, who, by the way, I have a long history with. I went to, Bobby and I were in the same a cappella college singing group. And
oh, wow.
We run into each other at reunions, and have since become friends, starting with working on Frozen. No, actually, he cold called me early in my career, right after he graduated, for advice on how to get his particular brand of musicals and songwriting going in Hollywood. I wasn't really able to help him at the time, but he obviously did just fine without me. He and Kristen I've been working with since Frozen 2. And we have a great friendship and a great working relationship. They know me as someone, and I like to think of myself as someone who really embraces the opportunity to, when working with original songs, to incorporate whatever musical material from those songs that makes sense into my score, especially in the case of a musical, and also in the case of something like WandaVision, where you have these really distinctive theme songs. I mean, the theme songs go right with the decades, and they're such a big part of every show.
And they're fantastic.
I'm sure they would thank you. I will pass that along. It only makes sense to try to incorporate the tunes from each of those songs into that respective show. But in addition to writing, a whole bunch of great themes, they also did something very clever, which is within the world of the themes that they wrote, there is connective tissue. There's a 4-note motif that they keep coming back to in really clever ways. This was pointed out to me early on in the process. Matt was really excited to bring that into the score as well. So it's all over the score. In fact, it's the last thing you hear at the end of the end credits piece. A slight variation of it, but it's the same 4 notes. I think when you do stuff like that, it really helps to build a cohesive whole across the entire series, from episode 1 to episode 9, that maybe not that many people notice overtly while they're watching the show, but on a subconscious level, it just brings it all together, and it just connects every moment of every episode to every other moment.
Just because I can't keep here all night, I got to get out of WandaVision, but I wish I could talk to you for 8 hours about it. Like, one last compliment. Like, I can't even listen to that last track when Wanda's saying goodbye to Vision, and you work in it kind of is building.
Yeah.
It swells all the way into the love theme. Are you kidding me? I can't even listen to it anymore. Okay, but don't react to that because I got to go to the next one. But also Wanda's theme, Ascendant, that track. Robbie and I did like a music themes power rankings, and it's funny because I think you held 2 of our 3 draft picks, with my number 1 being this Wanda's theme. Now, I have a couple questions about this. One, what is it like coming up with a theme for a character that A, is going to be around for a while, and B, doesn't really have a recognizable theme to this point? And are you thinking more about the project specifically regarding Wanda, or are you thinking about the long term of like, hey, in the future, it'd be fun to bring this back up or whatever?
Well, as you know, there are a variety of composers who work on MCU movies, and I only get to compose the scores for the movies that I'm scoring, obviously. So I hope and trust that, for example, in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which I believe Danny Elfman is scoring. Hey, Danny, how you doing? It would be great to hear Wanda's theme in there if you can find a spot for it, and if not, that's okay too.
That's what we're here for.
That is basically the way I would answer that question. Is like, we've got a great stable of composers with new people diving in all the time, and I believe in the talent. I believe in Marvel's ability to find the talent, and I believe in Kevin Feige's ability to direct the talent. I think that, you heard it was kind of a knock on in the early years of the MCU that there were no recognizable themes and there wasn't enough continuity between the movies. And I understand why people would say that. Even if you agree or don't agree, I think you can say that situation has gotten much better over a little while. Alan Silvestri wrote just an amazing, now iconic theme for Avengers. I used it several times in WandaVision, sometimes very subtly, and I'm sure we're going to hear that again.
But even as Captain America stuff now can be brought back in too.
Right, totally. There's such a wealth of great music in the MCU to continue to develop, and I know me personally, And I like to believe my colleagues feel the same way, that it's a great opportunity to, just as me using that 4-note motif from the WandaVision songs creates a cohesion within the 9 episodes of WandaVision, there's an opportunity here to create just a much more epic feeling of cohesion among 24, 25 movies now. Right. And I hope that continues. As far as what it was like to create a theme for someone who didn't really have a big theme yet, the character of Wanda, well, that's just an amazing opportunity for a composer to establish that sound and to get to be the composer that sets the tone. It is not the last time I'll get to do that. I can't wait till the next time. I will say one thing about that theme, though, is particularly the end credits piece that really tickled me was even as much television scoring as I did early in my career, I never really had the opportunity to work on to write a theme for a TV show. I did a couple of times, but they were shows that, didn't necessarily become iconic. And it was a great feeling watching the show, especially as it was airing, maybe with my kids, and getting to the end of a show and then hearing that theme come on at the end of every episode. It gave me that feeling that I got like when I was a kid and your favorite came on and the theme came on from the other room. You're like, oh, I'm going to go watch the show, and I run to the TV and sit down. So that was a bit of a nostalgic tingle.
It became like inadvertently like a cultural thing because every episode would end on such a cliffhanger and go right into that theme. And then we'd all be like, oh no, theme. That means it's over.
Yeah. I'm proud to be the author of music that could be a trigger from now on.
and then by the way, like you take the same theme, which is so mysterious, but then with Ascendant, you change that one passing chord on the way down. And then it gets so triumphant. Yeah. And it's like the same melody, and I just love that stuff. Sorry, Robbie, I'll let you get a question in.
Well, I had a couple that spring up just from your last response there. One, you talk about, these legends like Danny Elfman and Alan Silvestri, and how, in the case of Elfman, you're sort of hoping that he'll carry forward. We're hoping they'll carry forward the Wanda theme. And with Silvestri, you've used some of his stuff, but I also noticed like in Endgame, Silvestri gives the AntMan theme a little shout out. And I was curious, what's it like to hear a theme that you compose, being arranged by, kind of a legendary figure like Alan Silvestri in a film like Avengers Endgame?
Well, and that's a perfect transition into today's Hawkeye episode, because you worked in the Even For You Alan Silvestri thing from Infinity War and Endgame and the Yelena thing. So shout out you for doing the same. Let's go.
Yeah. Thank you. And Kyle, you're not doing a very good job letting Robbie get his question in.
I know.
So Robbie, I want to answer your question now.
Thank you.
Which I've now forgotten. Remind me again quickly what the question was.
No, I was just asking what it was like to hear a theme that you would compose.
Well, I've been a huge fan of Alan's for a long time. My first encounter with him was I've done, I think, 7 or 8 films for a director named Sean Levy, who directed Free Guy. Sean has also worked with Alan, and Sean asked me to write the music for his logo, for his production company, which is called 21 Laps. So before the movie starts, you'll see like 20th Century Fox logo and then another logo, 21 Laps in this case, and you'll hear 10 seconds of something that I wrote for this logo. And there was orchestra in it, and Sean was like, hey, we're doing a session next week with Alan. Maybe you could just come by and piggyback, and we could just spend 10 minutes recording. You're a 10-second thing. And that was my first time meeting Alan. And we've since had the opportunity to run into each other several times, and we've become definitely much more friendly. But I remember being so intimidated by him in that first session and feeling so ashamed and guilty for taking 10 minutes of his session time to do my piddly little logo music. But no, as a huge fan of his, it's obviously an incredible honor and thrill to hear music that I wrote in another film, just as it is when I, for example, was at Disneyland not too long ago and visited Avengers Campus, and they have music from the MCU on like a 40-minute loop piping through everywhere you walk in there, and the Ant-Man theme is one of them. It's really fun. It makes me feel a little bit like a rock star, which is what what I grew up dreaming to become. It's certainly not exactly the same type of rock star that I dreamed of becoming, but it's nice to feel that way once in a while.
Well, it's funny. Kyle actually did hint at something that I was going to ask about as well. So in a way, he let me ask my question by asking it.
All right, I'll take it back, Kyle. You're doing great.
Thank you.
But it was like I noticed to kind of transition into Hawkeye. There was a very obvious placement of this track from Infinity War and Endgame that Silvestri used. Particularly in this moment, it's a callback to when Black Widow dies.
Yep.
And I was just curious kind of what we've talked a bit about this, talking about WandaVision, but what that looks like as you're scoring an episode and you come up on a moment like that in the script. How do you get to the process of just, deciding to pull something like that in?
That was a little bit tricky, actually, because, we sat down to watch the episode together, me and the producers. And we came to that moment when he's telling that story in his apartment or in Kate's apartment, someone's apartment. It was a request of the producers, can we call back that moment? And I said, sure, let me go revisit it, check it out. And it's really big. And it's not particularly long either. So it's kind of, you definitely could not take that piece of music and put it in this scene. It would just feel totally outsized for the intimate moment that Kate Bishop and Hawkeye are sharing in that scene. So the challenge was, how can we take this kind of epic tragedy feeling and scale it down, way down, so it becomes so it still have that feeling of grief and regret, but it's not overtaking the scene sonically or emotionally. So that was just a question of really simplifying it and paring it down. So it's a really different arrangement than what was in Endgame. Yeah.
Well, we're loving it. I want to let you go on this. Hawkeye, loving it so far, loving the theme. Now, we don't have access to the score yet on Spotify, so it's just based off the show. Is there anything in particular you want us and our listeners to be looking for, something you're really proud of this Hawkeye score?
Well, first of all, one thing you and your listeners should be looking for is the soundtrack dropping, which is going to be this Friday.
Good.
And
good.
That is the best news I've heard all week.
Yep.
The first track on that soundtrack is the theme in all its glory, in super high quality. So
good.
There's that. But I would say there are, just as there were in WandaVision, there are a lot of musical Easter eggs in the score, particularly that moment from Avengers Infinity War. And that's not the last you're going to hear of it in this show. It will come back. And also Elena's theme as well. That will be coming back. Just as in WandaVision, it was an opportunity for me to create a very strongly thematic score. Like just about every piece of music has some reference to one of the main themes of the score. So those listeners of yours who have eagle ears, there's a lot there to chew on.
And Christmas elements.
Yes.
And the Christmas elements. Yeah, so maybe I'm the heist guy. You could also argue that I'm the Christmas guy. I have quite a few of Christmas movies on my credit list. I will say, though, I've resisted so far the temptation to use actual sleigh bells in all of my Christmas projects until this one.
Right. I know, I was about to say.
Yeah. So this will forever be known, at least to myself, as the project where I finally caved.
Well, I know our listeners are going to be so excited to hear that soundtrack is dropping. We are so glad that we got the chance to talk to you. We're so grateful to you for coming on. Can't wait to see how this Hawkeye score finishes out. And you referenced this earlier. I'm really, really excited to see what we get in the Ant-Man 3 score. So I'm going to sort of be eagerly awaiting that. And maybe we can have you back on whenever that's a little bit closer to talk about that process as well.
Anytime, guys. So much fun to be here.
Thanks, Christophe. Blast.
Thank you, guys.